Thank you. Welcome everyone that's joined us tonight. My name's Angela. I work in Onkaparinga Libraries in Adelaide, and we've got with us Tim Ayliffe, who is in Sydney in lockdown currently at the moment. Hi, Tim.
Hi, Angela. G'day, everyone.
It's Tim's book release day today, so we're very excited to be speaking to Tim. Before I get started, though, I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. So I wanted to also thank Simon & Schuster giving us this opportunity to talk to Tim. And I would also like to say I have read Tim's book here, and we haven't got a copy in the library yet. It's only just been released today, but you can put it on hold. You can do that in person, on the phone, or on the computer. You can also purchase it at lots of bookshops, I'm sure, but the bookshop we like to work with is Dimmock's at Glenelg, and they have got this stocked for you to purchase. They probably have all of Tim's other books too, so you can select them. And because the character who's in this latest one is in all three, it's probably a good idea to start at the beginning, I would say myself. So if you want a good read, get stuck into them, because I've read all three of them in the lockdown and they were really good. So you're a journalist now, and you've been a journalist for over 20 years. You're actually a managing editor of ABC News and Video at the moment. You've obviously had a long and exciting career, and it's very successful. So what prompted you to write a novel?
I've always wanted to be a writer, to be honest. I ever since I was old enough to read, I wanted to write. So all the way, I guess, through school, I was always writing something. Stories for school, and then I thought that journalism was a good path, but I was always chipping away at something on the side in those early years of being a journalist. So, look, I've always loved to read. I love the way that with novels you get to escape into a different place. So I loved that as a reader. So I really enjoyed that as a writer too. So yeah, it's always been something I've wanted to do. So I'm lucky enough to be able to do it.
Was it hard? Was it a hard process to get published when you did, after doing all the other stuff you've done?
Yeah, it's always, everyone's got an interesting publishing story. I think I wrote a book in my early 20s, which I'd probably call a bit of a practice book, but it really gave me a sense of the writer that I could be. And I had a good sort of friend of the family who used to be a reader for me, and he said to me, look, there are parts of the book I thought were really strong where you're writing in that pacey sort of thriller style, and I wonder if that's the kind of book where you end up, that's the kind of writer you want to be. And that comment stayed with me. And a few years went by. I was working in London, and then back in Australia, in Sydney and in Melbourne, and my wife and I having some young children, so I'd sort of stopped writing for a while. But when I started again, one day I just thought, well, that's the book I'm going to write. That comment always stayed with me, and I decided that the thriller style is what I would go for. But that's a book and a half of trying before that, and I think for me it was learning about the best writer that I could be, and once I figured that out, the writing process for me is really a joy. Like I love it. I mean, I've got a pretty busy day job, and I tend to write mainly on weekends, and sacrifice a little bit of sleep for it. But it's just because I love doing it, and the words come pretty easily for me. I don't struggle to write. I think plotting, is the real challenge, and that's where I have to hit pause, because I think you owe it to your reader to get those twists and turns and surprises in there.
That is true. As I was saying previously, I really loved the character Bailey. I like a strong character. What did you have an idea of what Bailey would be like before you wrote the book? Like, how did you come up with that character? And has he lived up to your expectations in your third book from when you started in your first book?
He's very real to me now. He evolved for me in the first book. When I started writing that book, I really had a scene in mind. and that was, basically a murder, which is often the case with a crime thriller. And then the character that I decided on, this sort of hard-bitten, sort of damaged, journalist who's obsessed with finding the truth. That part of his character I knew, and then he really grew from there. I mean, the first book for me took almost 3 years to write. So I was chipping away at that for quite a long time, and that was that whole learning process of learning about, the type of writer I'd be, and really learning about plot. And I really started reading a lot more in the genre too, to some of those authors that I really admired. And but when I got to the second book, John Bailey was very clear in my head. The first book really shapes his backstory. And saying that, you can read them all as standalones, but if you want the whole from the beginning in order, it's a neat way to do it. But you can read them as standalones too. I put enough in there to let you know who he is and what's happened to him. But so he's really real to me now. So when I sit down and start writing, I'm writing the fourth one at the moment. It's another John Bailey book, and that's okay. I'm sitting down and writing this one at the moment. John Bailey's really real to me. It's like visiting an old friend.
Yeah, I after reading this first and the second one, I was glad I had the third one to read, because I felt like a Netflix junkie, so I was just binging them. And after finishing the last one, I have to have some space between reading another book because they were so intense. There was a lot going on in them. There was one particular part in the latest book where you talk about the search warrant when they searched John Bailey's house, and you talked about a clause in the search warrant where they could basically alter, change, or delete any files that they found. And I thought, how did you come up with that? Because it's quite a unique thing, and I was quite horrified to think if that happens in the real world, that people could change evidence that they're gathering. And I just thought, what was the story behind adding that into the book?
Yeah, so look, with my books, I tend to have a bit of a I always, with my books, I always say about my books, everything in them either has happened, could happen, or will happen. So there is always a sense of truth. And in fact, I think with really good fiction and crime fiction, really, you can get really close to the truth on some things that, it's hard to do with non-fiction. But on that search warrant that you're talking about, in June 2019, I was sitting at my desk at the ABC, and someone ran over and said the AFP are raiding the building. So what? And a group of AFP officers had walked into the ABC Ultimo Centre, where ABC News channels broadcast out of, where I'm working, and they were chasing the source of a story that two fantastic ABC journalists, Dan Oakes and Sam Clark, had written quite a few years earlier, where they exposed some alleged human rights abuses by Australian soldiers in Afghanistan. And the warrant that they used to raid the ABC had this line in it that gave the police the power to add, copy, delete, or alter the ABC's files in the course of their search investigation. That line in the warrant was incredibly troubling for journalists like me, but I thought for everyone else as well. In fact, the head of investigations for the ABC, John Lyons, sat in the room with the police all day, for every minute of the day, and with an ABC lawyer just watching over what they were doing. And he live tweeted the entire thing. He got about another 10 or 15,000 followers during that time, because not only were we worried about what was going on at the ABC, but around the world, the BBC, some international broadcasters out of the US started picking up on the story, and there was a lot of people worried. Now, I'm not for a second saying there are bad eggs within the AFP that are going to do something with that power, but it did get me thinking, what if a power like that fell into the hands of the wrong person? So that's why, I thought,
You're cutting out a little bit now, so I'm just hoping
that's something that I could.
Yeah.
Into a crime thriller. Sorry, can you hear me okay?
Yeah. No,
Can you hear me okay now?
yeah, it was just dropping out a little bit there. I didn't hear that last bit you talked about.
Right. Okay. Oh, sorry about that. I'll just wind back a tiny bit. So my publisher Fiona Henderson rang me and said we were just talking about the latest sort of book I was working on, because I was obviously very interested in supremacists and far right nationalism, which is another part of the book, which I'm sure we'll talk about. And she said, "Wow, those AFP raids would make a good plot line and story." And I went, "Funny you should say that." And that's where that idea came from.
Wow, that's horrifying in one way, isn't it? On another note, in your book too,
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
I found myself googling a lot of things because you'd write something and I'd think, oh, did that happen? Was that true? And one of the things that caught my attention was that 14/88, and I obviously googled that and thought that is real. So how much research do you put into your books, or are they based mostly on experiences you've had or things you've seen in your reporting life?
A lot. I mean, as I said earlier, everything in my books either has happened, could happen, or will happen. And with that, as a Le Carre sort of wrote in a similar way, and people like Don Winslow as well. They're crime thrillers that are rooted in fact. So I do a lot of research. In fact, I'm lucky in a way because my day job is a little bit like research as well. I've worked in news for 2 years. And I work with some amazing people at the ABC, particularly great investigative journalists. I get an eye into some great stories that we're working on, and I get to meet some really interesting people. I mean, I get to have some conversations with people that that other people don't get to have. I'm lucky, and that I get a real sort of insight into the way the world sort of turns. I mean, look, with my first book, the idea that sort of the idea that I sort of was the impetus for the first book, The Greater Good. I was in America. I was there actually on a State Department scholarship and traveling around, and most of it is, well, pretty much all of it is sort of off the record Chatham House Rules stuff. You get to have some pretty interesting conversations with people in and around US government. But one bit I can share with you, which is not sort of breaching any confidentiality, was I was sitting in the State Department and talking to this really, really clever guy. There's a few of them, and we're all talking about American foreign policy, America's sort of pivot to Asia, which has sort of happened around that time under Obama. And this guy sort of said to me at the end, when I'd stopped asking all my questions, he said, "Do you mind if we ask you a few questions?" And I said, "Oh, sure. I'm just a journalist from from Australia. I'm not sure, how much about the world I'm going to be able to, tell you." But he said, "Could I ever imagine a day when Australia would turn its back on the United States and in favour of a closer relationship with China?" And I mean, my answer to that question in a way is irrelevant, but the fact that he was asking the question to me, said a lot about where the world was going, and that's about 8 years ago, 9 years ago, and that sort of gave me a good idea for a crime thriller, which is Australia caught in the middle of the US-China power struggle, which is the essence of the big overarching plot with my first book.
Yeah, that's true. That was going to be my next question. How do you choose your topics? Because all of your books felt very real, and I think is it close to home, a lot of the stuff in the books?
Yeah, my second book's about Islamic terrorism, and also it's about the media and social media, misinformation, and there's a lot of that in particularly the third book, The Enemy Within, the one that the reason we're talking today. So I do look at what's going on in the world and try to pick off a big issue or a big something that's happening. So for The Enemy Within, that's far right nationalism. We've got at the moment there's a half a dozen countries around the world that have as a leader a far right nationalist figure. We've got white supremacists, getting making headlines in many countries right across the world. And in fact, 18 months ago, not long after he'd taken over the new boss as the head of ASIO, Mike Burgess gave a speech and he called out white supremacists as one of the biggest sort of growing threats within Australia, and they were diverting a lot of resources towards it. And I was well into almost having finished this book by then, but actually I was actually probably about a third into the book by then. But it was really just reinforcing, what I'd seen as a journalist and what I felt was happening. That this sort of disenchantment, if you like, that a lot of these far right nationalist leaders were talking about, and and sort of trying to appeal to those that are maybe from lower socioeconomic groups, etc. Appealing to them to sort of join their cause. That was bringing some pretty other nasty people out of the woodwork, like our white supremacists.
In all of your books, but particularly in the last one, there was an underlying theme of how journalism has been corroded by things like social media and misinformation. How in your real job, in your day job, should I say, how do you combat that type of thing?
Well, stick to the facts. For us, we're trying to really, for me, I slow down the news cycle a bit, try to explain stories really well, fact-based reporting, be on a really strong footing with all that you're doing, but also, don't talk down to the audience as well. Make sure that we're, connecting with an audience, explaining stories properly, and being there on all the platforms where they want news. Because I think one of the problems that we've seen, particularly with the big social media platforms, is that a lot of people there, particularly those that feel that what they would call mainstream media isn't necessarily for them anymore, they're going to social media platforms and looking for answers. And on social media platforms, you are most likely to find the answers to that are kind of framed as you want to hear them. So you're going to find people who agree with you, and they may not be telling you the truth. And then on platforms like YouTube, and we've seen some of these big media companies change and tighten their policies around this, and they change up with algorithms because they realised that they'd sort of created a problem here. That then that platform may continue to give you more and more and more of that thing. So if you've been led down a rabbit warren, you're going to stay in there.
That is very true. That whole filter bubble is real. So unfortunately, I just wanted to say from the audience, if you've got any questions, you can pop them in the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen or in the chat button. If you can't see that bar at the bottom, just move your mouse around and the bar will appear. So if you've got any questions that you want to ask of Tim, do that now. There is a few comments in the chat, Tim. I don't know if you can see it, but someone's written, after 7 days of lockdown with teenagers, I can sympathise. And someone else has put, I feel like John Bailey is a friend of mine too. So there's some people on here that have read your other books. And Cassie has written, it's scary that that they can change and alter evidence, because that's obviously not a very well-known fact. And yeah, it's all very scary, someone else has written. So they're all the comments. Yep.
That's great. Well, thanks so much, everyone, for coming on and listening and taking part in the chat too. I'm really happy to answer any questions as we go. And that line in the warrant, it's obviously that was signed off by a district court judge in New South Wales. So yeah, I don't want to overplay the fact that power is there to be abused, but it does worry me that it was there in the first place, and that it could be abused, because in the wrong hands it really could.
Yeah, definitely. I had only one question so far from the audience, and that is, how do you fit writing into your busy schedule?
Look, it helps that I love it, and I find it a really relaxing. But I sort of compartmentalize it, just in the top little corner of my brain here, and I get to it on weekends, really. So my writing sort of regimen is, I get up at sort of 5:30 on Saturday and Sunday, and I'll write for 3 to 5 hours, just depending on what we've got going on with the family. So yeah, so that's when I do it. If ever I do anything during the week, it might just be up in the morning and just reviewing or something that I've written at the weekend. But most of the writing is really done at the weekend, and yeah, so I just maybe drink a little bit less than the night before, and
No
make
sleep
the other
in.
sacrifices. Yeah, no. But look, I'm not a huge sleeper. I really enjoy being up early. So yeah, weekends are good for that.
There was another question. What is your process? Are you a planner or a pantser?
I'm a bit of both, but increasingly, as I'm moving into my, I'm writing my fourth book at the moment. I do plan and plot a lot more. So I'll come up with an idea, and I may just get going, sort of writing, just to get a kind of feel of how that story is going to play out. And I might write 10, 20,000 words, maybe a bit more. And then I do hit pause, and then I think, okay, how am I going to plot this out now? Where are the big twists and turns? Have I got enough, action beats and things happening, throughout the book to really keep the viewer, the reader, I say viewer because it's sometimes very visual for me as well, but to keep the reader engaged. So yeah, so I'm becoming more of a plotter. Is the plotter is to answer that question. And I know that there are a lot of writers that just sit down and just go, I've got a basic idea and just go with it. Maybe I could do that a little bit more if I had more time, but I've got a day job whereby, I'm working, from very early in the morning till into the night. When I sit down to write now, I really want to know where I'm going, so that I'm not sort of wasting that time. So if I need to hit pause for a few weeks to work some stuff out, I do that.
So that might answer the next question: is, do you know how you want the book to end before you start?
Even when with the first two books where I didn't quite know the whole plots all the way through, I knew the ending. But in some ways I knew the ending, I think, with the new book Enemy Within. But what I don't know, and I've never really plotted out ever, is the true ending. And by that I mean, I always try to have another big turn or a big twist in there, to sort of give something to the reader whereby they might say, oh, I didn't see that coming. So yeah, I know part of the ending, but not the whole, usually.
What advice would you give to a young journalist choosing to pursue a career in the modern day journalism nowadays?
Modern day journalism. Work on the basics early on, because I think now the way we can put our stories together, the way we can report, everyone has a broadcasting platform. And when I was, getting trained up as a journalist, no one had a broadcasting platform unless you worked for a newspaper or a magazine, television, radio. So I think it's really important to learn those basic skills around journalism, which is really to be strong editorially. So the who, what, when, why, how stuff, that people should be learning through either university or cadetships. So don't be in a hurry in those early years, really, is my advice in journalism. Step through it, aim to really, work hard at the craft, and then, you can accelerate quickly once you've really, worked all that part out. But I think, don't be in a hurry. Just respect that, there's a lot of people out there that have a bit of wisdom that's probably worth listening to. I mean, I learn a lot from a lot of, older journalists out there.
How did you come up with the character of John Bailey? Is he inspired by someone in particular?
He's not one person. He's definitely drawn from my experiences and a lot of people that I've worked with over the years. So he's definitely not one person. He's not based on one person. So he's an amalgam of a lot. People that I worked with, overseas in London, I worked with here in Sydney and in Melbourne, and then those that I, grew up watching, and then watched as a journalist myself. So yeah, he's just sort of the right amalgam of journalists and people and personality. There's a bit of me in there as well. He was an amalgam that I wanted to create someone who can, take the reader on a ride every book. So that's where I came up with him. Having a bit of trouble with that light.
It's because we were in a green building, and if I'm not moving about, the lights.
Oh, really?
Sorry.
That's all right. I was picturing a light falling over.
No, because I'm in the office. So, how many? Do you know how many more Bailey books you're going to be writing?
A lot is probably the short answer. I really feel that I want to write a lot of Bailey books. As I said, he feels very real to me now. So, I've already got two more ideas, or three actually, that I would like to do as John Bailey books, and so yeah, I'll keep going. I love the character, and as long as the readers are enjoying the books, I'll keep writing them.
Well, that's great news for me, because I think it's the best book I've read all year. So,
thank you.
Giving
That's
it
high praise.
Gold star, more than one.
Thank you.
There is another question here. Do your children show any interest in writing and creating in that way as well?
Yeah, my daughter is been writing a little bit. My son as well. But both kids are quite creative, but they're just sort of immersed in looking at all different things. They're reading, and son loves drawing, and my daughter's very artistic. She paints and she sings, and so I think for them, they've just got to find the thing that they love, and for me to support them to do that. But I mean, I'm big on reading, and so is my wife. Like the kids read every night, and read with them, and that's where I found my love of books, not necessarily as an author, but as a reader first up. I mean, that's where, if you want to be a writer, you first got to be a reader. And that's what I did, and that's what I'm trying to do with them.
So there is a couple of questions or a couple of comments about Bailey, and what they want to know: will he find love again? And yeah, is he going to have it written into his character that he has a relationship?
Well, you need to read The Enemy Within.
Yeah.
Look, there's a really strong, and look, there's a character from an earlier book, Annie Brooks, who Bailey had a relationship with back in Beirut in the 90s. And I really like her character, and she's got a big role in The Enemy Within, as her own kind of starring role, as in her job as a journalist, and but then also her connection with Bailey, and they both have an issue with the booze, and that's how they've sort of connected over that, and they've both sort of chosen life over that kind of drinking. So she's someone that Bailey does have a connection with, but whether that's a connection that lasts, it's difficult with guys like Bailey. They're so obsessed with the job, and finding the truth that they forget about some of those other parts of their life, unfortunately. But we'll see.
Are all your other characters similar to Bailey in the sense that they're a mishmash of people you know, like Ronnie? Because Ronnie's one of my favourite characters.
Yeah, he's one of mine too. Look, Ronnie, I don't know any CIA agents, but but I've met some people who work in intelligence over the years, and look, Ronnie's one of my favourite characters. He is not based on anyone, but then he's based on a lot of people that I guess researched and read about and over the years. There are other characters in the books that that definitely I've drawn from parts of people for those characters, whether that's their sort of physical looks or their personality traits or how they operate as a cop, whether it's Sharon Dexter as a cop or as Gerald Summers as the newspaper editor. There's a lot in these people that's very, very real and drawn from real life.
Yeah, with Ronnie, I had to Google Bubba and why he calls Bailey Bubba, and yeah, it's because it's such an intimate phrase that makes the character seem very real.
Yeah. He sort of sees him as his, they're brothers in a way, that chose different paths in life, and they've both would argue that they believe in the same things, which is justice and truth, but Ronnie comes at it a very different way.
Definitely.
And his idea of truth and justice is probably more wrapped around the American ideal.
There is a question here. Your book references home raids on journalists. What legal precautions would you advise journalists to be mindful of?
I think just always sticks to the facts and be able to back up your stories, but then protect your sources, and that's what those raids are all about, really. If you think about the impact of whistleblowers in all parts of our life, I mean, a foundation of democracy is a free press, and it can't be an arm of a state. It needs to act alone, and if sometimes the state is not doing well enough on something, or has done the wrong thing, or has through its bureaucratic nature has missed something that's really terrible going on. Whistleblowers are really important, and those whistleblower laws are equally the right to protect sources is very important for journalists. So that's something that I think all journalists should take incredibly seriously.
Yeah, that's true. Did you choose to give John a problem with alcohol because that's a typical issue for journalists, or is it a more personal issue?
Look, fair question. I think that Australia has a problem with booze. More generally, I would say that we do have a bit of a binge sort of culture that I'm seeing in a lot of young people. I think it's starting to change a bit, actually, which I think, hats off to the millennials. They tend to, drink a bit less and maybe be a little bit more ambitious with other things. But like personally, I'm not an alcoholic, but I think journalism, the media in general, has been a very, very boozy industry. I've seen a lot of people self-medicate, and I've known people close to me in my life that have had problem with booze as well. And so for me, I wanted to write about that because I wanted to make Bailey a very real character, a real Australian character. And so I felt that even though it may feel or sound a little cliched to someone of his age, early 50s, having worked through the 80s and 90s as a journalist, a lot of work was done in the pub, and so that was me being, I think, true to journalists of that era.
Yep, that's definitely the 80s was a bit like that, wasn't it? I think that is all for the questions. No more coming through. So I want to thank you for joining us tonight. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And don't forget, everyone, you can put the book on hold, or you can purchase this at Dimmock's Glenelg or through Onkaparinga Libraries, or any library any library. Most libraries will get this book because it's an awesome read. So thank you for joining us. I will be sending out a feedback survey tomorrow via email. So if you can fill that in, that would be awesome. And once again, thanks for joining us tonight, Tim.
Thanks, Angela. It's been a real joy. It's great. And my book was launched today. I'm launching in lockdown. It's a funny old time, but look, thank God for readers out there. And I hope everyone who's come on tonight, if you do get around to reading the book, I hope you enjoy it. And thanks for your interest.
Excellent. Thanks, and take care. And hopefully we'll see you in person one day.
Indeed. Thanks so much, Angela. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
See ya.